Hello guys, I'm here with a new series. Hey guys, I released new episodes for my other series. I'm not sure if you guys still want me to continue those series. Now here is the Slytherin selection. Chapter 4. Harry found himself alone in the Slytherin dormitory on Christmas. Draco had likely teased him about staying at Hogwarts, but Harry could tell it wasn't serious. His friend obviously preferred that Harry stay at Hogwarts rather than going home to live with Muggles. Christmas morning dawned cold, and when Harry awoke he found several small presents wrapped at the foot of his bed. Harry was astounded. He had never before received a Christmas present. He grabbed the nearest and tore it open. It was a flute, from Hagrid. Next was a smallish package from the Dursleys, 50 pence and a nasty note. A nicely wrapped package from the Draco and his parents contained beautiful green and silver mittens and a matching hat. The tags noted that the mittens and hat were wash only, whatever that meant. It sounded expensive. Beneath it all was an unsigned package, and in that package was a shimmering opalescent cloak. As Harry pulled it out of the package, he received a dramatic shock. Not only could he see straight through the material, but he couldn't see his hand. A note fell out of the package onto his bed. Harry thought that he couldn't be more astonished by his unexpected gift, but was quickly proved wrong. Not only was this an invisibility cloak, but it had belonged to his father. Harry glanced around the dormitory. Nobody else was present. He raised the cloak to his nose and inhaled deeply. It had been 11 years, but maybe there would be a hint of cologne, or lemon? Did his cloak smell like cleaning solution? Harry inhaled again. No, it was something sweeter. Almost like candy. Lemon drops. Why would his invisibility cloak smell like lemon drops? Harry pondered his mysterious benefactor, and his cloak's mysterious smell, as he went downstairs for breakfast. The Great Hall was nearly empty. Only one other first year had remained behind, Ron Weasley, who was currently sitting at the Gryffindor table. Weasley was wearing an enormous, apparently hand-knitted jumper with a larger letter R on the chest. Harry hesitated. He had never liked sitting alone at lunch when he was at Muggle school, but the unrelenting harassment of Dudley and his gang of cronies had forced Harry to do so. Anybody who was friendly with Harry quickly became a target of Dudley's bullying, and as a result, Harry was ostracized. Every day Harry ate alone, isolated while the other students chatted with friends. Harry had been terribly excited to discover that meals at Hogwarts were sorted by house. He always had a place to sit at meals, and always had somebody to talk to. Harry had no desire to return to eating alone. With his entire house gone for holidays, Harry's desire to sit by Weasley was desperate. On the other hand, things were tense between Weasley and Draco. Weasley and Draco had called an unofficial truce following the troll incident on Halloween, but the antagonism between the pair had slowly been increasing following Slytherin's Quidditch victory. And while Granger had been much nicer to Harry following Halloween, neither Harry nor Granger would say hello to the other if Draco or Weasley was within earshot. Harry was still frozen with indecision when Weasley looked up and saw him standing at the threshold of the Great Hall. Harry was too nervous to speak, too nervous to act. The only thing he could do was look at the seat across from Weasley and raise a questioning eyebrow. Weasley, mouth full, simply shrugged. Enormously relieved, Harry walked over to the table. As he sat down, Harry resolved not to provoke Weasley. Harry would control himself, and if Weasley could, too, then they might make it through the meal alive. "Thanks," said Harry. "No PRWBWM," Ron said, still chewing. The two boys were quiet for several moments as Harry selected food for his plate. Finally, Ron swallowed his enormous mouthful of food. "Why are you here for Halls, Potter?" Harry shook his head. "Muggle family doesn't want me. Which works out, because I don't want them, either. How about you?" "Parents are in Romania, visiting my brother Charlie. He works with dragons." "Sounds like a brilliant holiday. Why didn't you go along?" Ron's face flushed and he turned to scoop more food on his plate. "Right," said Harry. Sensing Ron's discomfort, Harry changed the subject. "So, get anything good for Christmas?" "My aunt and uncle sent me 50 pence. Biggest Christmas present I've ever gotten from them." Ron speared a sausage on his fork. "I got some chocolate frogs and a few other sweets, but those are already gone." "Before breakfast? And you're still eating like that?" Ron paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "So?" Harry laughed. "Never mind. So that's it, just sweets." "I got a jumper, too," Ron said, his face turning red. "My mum makes them every year. It's mostly embarrassing." Harry immediately felt like an idiot. If Ron's parents couldn't afford to take him to Romania, they probably couldn't afford extravagant gifts, either. Of course Ron would feel vulnerable around Christmas, because of the accompanying gift giving. But that jumper? I wish I had something like that, Harry said. What, something ugly? No, Harry said. Something from my mum. Ron nodded, suddenly quiet. Harry was quiet for a moment. When I'm at my aunt and uncle's house, I have to wear my cousin's hand-me-downs. It's awful. He's the size of a rhino, and acts like one, too. Ron grinned. The first time I ever did magic, Harry said, I was at the zoo. My cousin pushed me out of the way to look at a snake through a glass window. I was so mad, I accidentally made the glass disappear, and the snake chased him around the room. Ron laughed, then covered his nose with his hand. Come on, Potter, you almost made me shoot milk out my nose. My clever plan has been foiled, Harry said with a grin. Harry's actual plan, to distract Ron from being embarrassed about money, had been quite successful. And this smaller plan? The plan that Harry didn't really want to admit to himself? The plan to make a new friend by sharing a little bit of his own vulnerability about his parents? That plan, not that Harry would ever admit it existed, also seemed to have been successful. The boys easily chatted through the rest of breakfast, exchanging stories about Harry's oath of a cousin and Ron's numerous older brothers. When they returned for dinner later that night, the boys again sat together. So, Ron said, was 50 pence all you got for Christmas? No, Harry said, I got some gloves and a scarf from the Malfoys, and Hagrid got me a flute. And, Harry paused, unsure if he should continue. And something you're going to have to see to believe. Come by Slytherin after dinner. When Ron arrived outside the Slytherin common room, he hesitated outside the door, then began pacing back and forth. Without the password, he couldn't get in. With all the other students gone, there was no way to send a message to Harry inside the dormitory, either. He finally came to a stop, staring at the door, a look of complete bafflement on his face. Harry's floating head appeared next to him. Watcher, Ron. Ron yelled and jumped backwards. Harry, laughing, pulled the rest of the invisibility cloak off his body. An invisibility cloak? Are you serious? Yeah, I am. Cool, huh? Ron scowled. How long have you been watching me act like an idiot in front of the door? Only a few minutes, Harry said. He smiled to show Ron that he wasn't being cruel. You sound like Fred and George, Ron said, referring to his infamous prankster twin brothers. They would kill to get their hands on an invisibility cloak. And this was a Christmas present? Do you have any idea how rare these are? Who gave it to you? Harry shrugged. Package wasn't signed, but whoever it was left a note. It was my dad's. Ron stepped forward and grabbed a piece of the cloak. As he rubbed the material of the cloak between his fingers, his skin disappeared and reappeared with each movement of the cloth. This, Ron said, is completely cool. Come on, Harry said, let's go play a prank on Filch or something. Ron smiled. I know something better. Let's go up to the 3rd floor. The boys ducked under the invisibility cloak and made their way up several moving staircases. Moments later, the boys stood outside the door that Dumbledore had forbidden them to enter earlier in the term. When Malfoy challenged me to duel, Ron said, Seamus and I came up here. Before you and Malfoy could show, Filch found us. Harry knew that he and Malfoy had never intended to duel, and had instead sent Filch to catch Ron. Harry felt guilty, but said nothing. Seamus and I split up and ran, Ron said. I wound up on the other side of this door. You're not going to believe what's in there. Stay quiet. Harry and Ron quietly opened the door and snuck inside. At the far end of the hallway, looming larger than the troll from Halloween, was a giant, 3-headed dog. Its paws were larger than Harry's bed, and any of its 3 heads could have swallowed Harry in one gulp. The dog was lying on the ground, and the 3 heads were fighting each other for control of an enormous bone. What is that? Whispered Harry. It's a giant, 3-headed dog, said Ron. The real question is, why is it here? Well, it's Dumbledore's, Harry said. He told us to stay away at the welcoming feast, and it's pretty obvious why. But it's a stupid place to keep a giant, 3-headed dog. The thing's dangerous. Why keep it in a school full of kids? Ron was making a frightening amount of sense. I think it's a guard dog, Ron said. On Halloween, Snape had a bloody gash on his leg, and I heard him talking to Dumbledore about the 3rd floor. I think Snape was trying to get past the dog and he got bit. Snape wouldn't do something like that, Harry said, automatically defending his head of house. Besides, he was telling Dumbledore about it. If he was trying to get past a guard dog and steal something, he wouldn't tell the person he was stealing from. Maybe, Ron conceded. But I sure wish I knew what it was guarding. Ron and Harry's holiday friendship dissolved when classes resumed. With Draco and the rest of the Slytherin boys back in the castle, Harry didn't lack for company. Similarly, Ron took meals with Finnegan, Longbottom and the rest of the Gryffindors. On the first night back, Harry showed Draco the invisibility cloak. That night, after curfew, the two boys used the cloak to sneak out of the Slytherin dormitory. Harry took Draco to the third-floor corridor and showed him the dog. "What do you think could be hidden there?" Draco asked, once the boys were safely in the hallway. "I've been thinking about that," Harry said. "On the day you and I met in Diagon Alley, I went to Gringotts with Hagrid. He was getting something important from a vault for Dumbledore. Hagrid pulls something important out of a vault in Gringotts, and Dumbledore has a giant, three-headed guard dog. Whatever it is that Hagrid got, I bet the dog's guarding it." Draco looked thoughtfully at the door. "You know, a thief broke into Gringotts earlier this year. It was only a few days before we came to Hogwarts. Not the Malfoy vault, thankfully, but still. Do you think it's connected?" Draco shrugged. "I'm going to go ask Hagrid about it," Harry said. "That big oaf won't know anything," Draco said. "But, if you must, be sure to tell me anything you find out." Harry didn't like Draco speaking poorly of Hagrid, but Harry said nothing. There was no requirement that Harry's friends had to be friends with each other. This was just one of those times. The next night, Harry once again set out under the cover of his invisibility cloak, this time toward Hagrid's hut. The hut was extraordinarily hot, and Harry immediately began sweating when he sat down. Hagrid closed the door behind Harry. "Cup o' tea, Harry." "Yes, please." Hagrid began busying himself by the stove. "So, Harry, are ye liking your time at Hogwarts?" "I love it," said Harry. "It's the greatest." "And how are ye doing in Slytherin?" Hagrid seemed hesitant to ask. "They treatin' ye all right." "What do you mean?" Harry wasn't sure why Hagrid was asking. Of course he was getting on all right in Slytherin. It was the Gryffindors who were the problem. "I mean, are ye bein' pushed around or hexed or anything? I can talk to Dumbledore about it, if ye are." Hagrid was setting out teacups and saucers on the table. The cups were comically small in Hagrid's enormous hands. "No, Hagrid, nothing like that is happening. I'm friends with all my housemates. At least, I'm friends with all the first years." "Oh." Hagrid was quiet for a moment, and was startled back to attention by the whistle of the teapot. "Well, as long as you're all right." Harry was perplexed. It was almost as if Hagrid was sad that Harry was doing well. But that couldn't be right. Harry decided to change the subject. "Hagrid, I wanted to thank you again for Hedwig. She's the best. Over halls, when everybody was home, it was nice to have some company. And I got to send presents to all my friends, and she brought some back to me. Oh, and thank you for the flute." Hagrid smiled. "It weren't anything, Harry. I hope ye like it." "I do," said Harry. "It was the first Christmas I've ever really gotten gifts." "What else did ye get?" Hagrid asked, taking a sip of tea. "Well, the Malfoy sent me green and silver mittens, and a hat," Harry said. Hagrid paused, holding his teacup up to his face far after he had stopped drinking. "Did they?" he said. "How nice for ye." "They're really warm," Harry said. "And speaking of warm, why is it so hot in here? It's like a furnace." Harry pulled at the collar of his shirt. Hagrid glanced around. "Can ye keep a secret, Harry?" Of course. Harry loved secrets. Keeping a secret, something special between two people, it really made Harry feel like he had friends. Hagrid turned and began rummaging around under the stove. He removed a large blanket, which appeared to be wound around some sort of object. Hagrid pulled away the blanket and revealed an egg. Once again, Hagrid had thrown Harry for an unexpected turn. "Not just any egg, Harry. A dragon egg. Gotta keep it hot, or it won't hatch." "Where are you going to keep a dragon, Hagrid?" In here." "It's a dragon, Hagrid. It'll get too big. What are you going to feed it? And it'll burn you out of house and home." "Just let me worry about that," Hagrid said. Harry suddenly saw his opportunity. "Next you'll be telling me that you want to get a giant, three-headed dog." "Oh, I already got one o' them," Hagrid said. The large man was carefully rewrapping the egg, not paying attention to what he was saying. "Fluffy's up on the third floor." "Oh." Harry spoke carefully, trying to keep Hagrid talking. "Why's Fluffy up there?" "Because Dumbledore." Hagrid suddenly looked up from the egg. "Oh, I shouldn't have said that." "What about Dumbledore?" Harry dropped all pretense of being casual, eagerly leaning forward. "What's up on the third floor is between Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel," Hagrid said. "You can just drop it." "Who's Nicholas Flamel?" Harry asked. Hagrid dropped his head. "Shouldn't said that, either." Hagrid stood. "In it past curfew, Harry? Ye should get back to bed." Harry recognized that he wasn't going to learn any more from Hagrid that evening. "Thanks for the tea, Hagrid. You're a great friend." Harry gave Hagrid a hug, then started back toward Hogwarts. Once he was out of sight of Hagrid's cabin, he ducked underneath his invisibility cloak. Back in the castle, Harry headed straight for the dungeons. What was Hagrid going to do with a dragon egg, let alone a dragon? What were Hagrid and Dumbledore guarding with a giant, three-headed dog named Fluffy? And who was Nicholas Flamel? Although the invisibility cloak protected Harry from prying eyes, it did nothing to protect Harry against his own stupidity. Harry, distracted by his thoughts, tripped over something in the hall and stumbled into a suit of armor. There was an enormous amount of shouting, yowling, crashing and banging as Harry struggled to regain his balance. A marching band could not have made more noise. A light appeared at the end of the hallway, Filch with a lamp, investigating the racket. Harry turned around and discovered that he had tripped over Mrs. Norris, the caretaker's cat. The cat sniffed the air and moved toward Harry, mewling softly. Harry backed away from Mrs. Norris, but the cat continued to follow him, mewling louder and louder. As the light grew brighter, Harry dashed away from Mrs. Norris. He ran through the nearest door and slammed it behind him. Harry pressed his ear against the door and listened as Filch investigated the jumbled pieces of armor. Harry could hear the caretaker rearranging the armor, grumbling and cursing the entire time. Even after the hallway grew silent, Harry did not leave his hiding place. He wanted to be certain that Filch had gone. Waiting, however, was boring. Harry decided to explore the room in which he was hiding. It was a largish room with interesting columns and tall windows. The room was almost entirely empty. The only furnishing was a tall mirror, standing precisely in the center of the room. A strange inscription ran around the frame of the mirror. Curious, Harry stood in front of the mirror. The mirror reflected only an empty room. Harry was perplexed, then smiled. He removed the invisibility cloak, and was greeted by his mirror image, and more. Harry spun around. There was nobody behind him. Harry turned and looked at the mirror again. Yes, there he stood, but behind Harry's reflection stood his parents, smiling. Harry wasn't sure how long he stayed in that room, but he was very tired when he crept back to the Slytherin dormitory. Harry was fascinated by the mirror. He came back the next night, and the night after that. Each time, the image changed slightly. Once, his reflection was wearing a sweater with a giant H on the front, and his mother was carrying knitting needles. Another time, his reflection was throwing a quaffle with his father. On the third night, Harry brought Draco with him. He wanted to show his parents to Draco and make sure that he wasn't crazy. Draco, however, saw something different. "It's my father," Draco said. "My father and me. He's proud of me." He hugged them. Draco stopped abruptly. "What?" Draco's tone had changed. All the wonder was gone from his voice, replaced with tension. "He hugged my mother." "You didn't say your mother was there." "Well, she was. My father hugged my mother and they are happy and I'm standing in front of them and I'm happy, too. We're all happy." Harry had the impression that Draco was lying about what he saw. The next day, the boys did not speak of the mirror, and Harry didn't invite Draco to return. On the fourth night, Harry saw his mother carrying a small child wrapped in a blue blanket, Harry's brother, who had never been born. Harry was suddenly filled with anger. Was this what Voldemort had taken from him? His parents, his brother? His childhood? His entire life? Harry squeezed his eyes shut and clenched his hands into fists. He was trembling with rage. When he opened his eyes, the image in the mirror had changed. Harry saw himself, older and alone, with a wand in his hand. Reflection. Harry waved the wand, and mist appeared, coalescing into two human shapes. Those shapes gained color, became solid, and formed themselves into Harry's parents. How much magic would it take? Harry thought. And, almost immediately, the words of the Sorting Hat, "Slytherin could make you great." Back again, Harry. Harry spun around. He had been so wrapped in his own thoughts that he hadn't heard Dumbledore enter the room. The headmaster was standing slightly behind Harry, his face serene. "Professor, Dumbledore held up a hand, stopping Harry mid-sentence. "Do you understand what you are seeing in the mirror, Harry? The future that might have been." Harry was guessing. Dumbledore smiled. Perhaps, but perhaps not. The mirror of Erased shows your heart's deepest wishes, Harry. If I may be so bold, what is it that you see? I see my parents, Harry whispered. I wish I had them back. Dumbledore's face fell, as if he was succumbing to a distant sadness. A worthy desire, Harry, to see your family again. Nevertheless, the mirror of Erased is dangerous. Many great wizards have wasted away in front of this mirror, trapped in its lies and their own longing. For that reason, the mirror will be moved tomorrow. I ask for your promise that you will not seek it out again. Harry nodded. Good, said Dumbledore. Now, if you will take one last look, I will escort you back to your dormitory. Harry turned again to the mirror, expecting to see one last glimpse of his parents. Instead, Harry's older reflection stood alone in the center of the mirror. The mirror grew darker and darker around Harry's reflection, whose eyes flickered bright green and black as if lit by fire. Chapter 5. As the term went on, Harry discovered that he was growing slightly bored with his classes. Early in the year, he had been fascinated by the simple prospect of doing magic. Now, the luster had worn off, and he was beginning to realize that he was at school, which required doing work and listening to teachers as they gave lectures. History of magic, taught by the ghost of Professor Binns, was notoriously sleep-inducing. Boredom can kill, Draco insisted. Otherwise, Binns would still be alive. The class had so little to do with the actual practice of magic that Harry and Draco would alternate taking notes while the other slept through the lecture. Professor Quirrell's defense against the dark arts class was surprisingly tedious, as well. Harry had high hopes for the class. What could be more interesting than an entire class about fighting, after all, but Quirrell taught predominantly by lecture. This was an odd choice, given Quirrell's notorious stutter. Harry stayed awake and paid attention, because he wanted to learn magic, but he always left the class with a headache. Probably from Quirrell's stutter. Potions with Professor Snape had improved, even though he still needed quite a bit of help from Draco. Harry had begun to receive the benefits of Snape's Slytherin favoritism, and that was just fine with Harry. Charms had proved to be Harry's favorite subject, with its large amount of wandwork and spellcasting. Although Harry had lagged significantly behind the magically raised students at the start of the year, he discovered quickly that he had a natural talent for charms work. Harry could think of at least one troll who could attest to Harry's skill at Wingardium Leviosa. In charms, Harry felt most like a wizard, and he devoted extra time to studying. Because many of the charms had practical applications, levitating trunks, repairing broken items, tickling classmates, Harry found plenty of opportunities to practice. In the early spring, Pansy decided to throw herself a birthday party in the Slytherin common room. Harry knew that Pansy wanted to do something for her birthday, but he was surprised by the scale of her plan. Her party was announced at breakfast when over 40 owls simultaneously swarmed over the Slytherin table, delivering absurdly ornate invitations. Draco, Harry asked, if everybody in Slytherin got invited, why did Pansy even bother with invitations? Of course she'd send invitations, said Draco. How else would we know there's a party? She's been talking about it for weeks, Harry said. She could have just told us when it was. We eat at the same table 3 times a day. Harry, don't be vulgar. That's completely inappropriate. I don't see what's wrong with it. Draco sighed. Watch. Draco stood and yelled down the table. Hey, Pansy. If you wanted to invite us to a party, you could have just told us. We eat at the same table 3 times a day. Pansy's eyes got wide. Draco, don't be vulgar. That's completely inappropriate. Draco made a grand gesture with his arm, as if to say, voila. Harry still didn't understand, but he didn't ask any more questions. As the week progressed, Harry heard many of the upper-year Slytherins grumbling about Pansy's party. Pansy was arrogant, Pansy was presumptuous, Pansy didn't know her place. Pansy apparently heard the rumblings, as well. Exactly 1 week after her invitations had been delivered, another parliament of owls bombarded the Slytherin breakfast table, this time delivering supplementary notices promising live entertainment, elite catering, and an walking birthday cake in the shape of Gilderoy Lockhart. The murmurs among upper-year Slytherins quickly ceased. Nobody wanted to risk being uninvited. 2 weeks before the party, Harry found Draco lying in their dormitory, flipping through a World's Edge clothing catalog. Next to him was a piece of parchment covered with notes. On the pages of the catalog, well-dressed wizards laughed on boats, smiled while eating fruit salad, and tossed quaffles to one another in clothing that was not at all suited for sport. Occasionally, they stood on beaches with similarly well-dressed witches. What are you wearing to the party? Draco asked, without looking up. My robes. Harry looked down at his clothes. Nothing was wrong with them that he could see. Harry. Please. I'm trying to decide, and you aren't being helpful at all. I was serious, Harry said. Draco looked up and saw that Harry was, in fact, serious. Muggle raised. Harry, you can't just wear your normal school robes. You'll be laughed out of Slytherin. This is an event. You have to carefully consider what you wear. Draco turned back to the catalog. Hopefully, you'll wear something new, he said, half to himself. Why does it matter? Some days I think you're completely hopeless. Draco made another note on his parchment, then sat up and closed the catalog. What you wear makes a statement. It says, I'm serious, or, I'm playful, or, your party is so shameful that I hardly dressed up, or, I'm such a nitwit that I didn't know to dress up properly. Hey. It's true, Draco said with a shrug. Whether you want to or not, you will be making a statement with what you wear. Here's a good catalog, I picked out what I want, so you can keep it. Harry took the catalog. Can't I just copy from your order? No, you cannot. If you did, your clothes would say, I'm not able to dress myself, and my clothes would say, I'm dumb enough to wear the exact same clothes as my best friend. Draco shook his head. Choose something for yourself, for both our sakes. Later that night, Harry sat on a couch in the Slytherin common room, flipping through the World's Edge catalog over and over. Nothing made sense to Harry. In the Muggle world he had been forced to wear Dudley's hand-me-downs, but at least he understood what clothing items were, even if he didn't understand fashion. The Wizarding catalog contained items that Harry could barely comprehend. The whip-crack ties, for instance, appeared to be neckties which would untie themselves and snap at the faces of passers-by. The eruptor links were worn on the cuffs of dress shirts seemed to fire small jets of magma every 10 to 15 minutes. At one point, Harry thought he was looking at a coat, only to discover that the item was intended to be worn as a hat. Harry closed the catalog with a grunt of frustration. Having a hard time with clothes. Harry looked up. Tracy Davis was sitting in a chair across from him, but Harry hadn't noticed her sit down. The blonde girl had her legs curled underneath her. I'm trying to figure out what to wear for Pansy's party, but I can't make sense of anything, said Harry. Why don't you wear something you already have? It won't be new, but you won't have to worry. Harry could feel himself blushing slightly. All I have are school robes, actually. Oh. That is a problem, then. Tracy walked over to the couch and sat down next to Harry. Let's have a look. We'll find you something good. Was there anything you liked? Harry pointed at a robe in the catalog. I don't like this robe, but it's black so I wouldn't have to buy new pants. Black never matches black. Huh. These clothes are all made from different fabrics and different weaves, and then they're dyed differently. Unless it's from the same company, same material, same batch, it won't match. Even then, sometimes not. Harry nodded as if he understood. Davis continued to speak, staring at the catalog as she flipped from page to page. The worst thing anyone can do is try to match, but fail, Tracy said. The party is soon, so you won't have any time to return and reorder. That means we should stick with neutrals or color complements. You'll probably need new everything. The words coming out of Tracy's mouth were as strange to Harry as any spell he had learned at Hogwarts. How about this, then? Harry pointed at another robe. Tracy clucked her tongue. Harry, you're much more of a winter than a summer. What? That's far too red-orange. You need a blue-red. What? You really were Muggle-raised, weren't you? Tracy had moved on from robes to ties in the catalog. Why do people keep saying that? I'll just pick something for you, Harry. Thank me after the party, please. Tracy never looked up from the pages of World's Edge. Harry resigned himself to looking over Tracy's shoulder, his clothing now completely out of his hands. On the evening of the party, Harry dressed himself in his new robes, new pants, and new shirt, new tie, even new socks. The only things that weren't new were his shoes. And his underwear. Harry wasn't about to discuss that with a girl. As he stood in front of the mirror in his dormitory, he had to admit, Davis knew what she was doing. His robes were dove gray, and his pants were dark charcoal with ash gray socks. His shirt was slate gray and had heather gray pinstripes. Harry's tie, however, was solid yellow. The yellow was so blinding that Harry was convinced the color could not have been created without magic. Can't I wear something other than gray? Harry had asked Tracy when the clothes arrived. No. It's a look. What color are my robes again? Dove. Dove is a kind of gray. Yes. Do I have to wear a yellow tie? Yes. It's an accent piece. You sound like you're decorating a house. You're acting like a house. That doesn't make sense. Neither does your inability to dress yourself. And that had been the end of it. Draco came up behind Harry in the dormitory, taking a moment to appraise his friend's state of dress. You look respectable, Draco said. How did you manage that? Davis picked everything out. I'm just wearing it. Yikes. Draco made a face. Why Davis? I'm sure Pansy would have helped you. Davis offered, Harry said. What's wrong with that? She's a weird one, Draco said. Weird how? Harry hadn't noticed anything that was particularly wrong with Davis. She was quiet, and kept to herself. Her only friend seemed to be Daphne Greengrass. Draco shrugged. I'm just saying that I wouldn't trust her to dress me. Then again, I've been able to dress myself for years. How many different kinds of gray are you wearing, exactly? Harry furrowed his brow and glared at his friend. Shut it, Draco. He paused for a moment. 5. Draco laughed. Come down to the common room, the party is about to. Before Draco could finish his sentence, the boom of music began pounding through the Slytherin common room. Strike that. The party has started. Let's make our appearance, shall we? Almost all of Slytherin had gathered in the common room. Several tables covered in plates of food were pushed up against one wall. Charmed servingware hovered over the buffet, threatening to dump food onto anything plate-shaped that happened to pass by. On the opposite side of the room was a live band, comprised of 2 recently graduated Slytherins and the least famous member of the moderately famous but broken-up wizarding band Wandcast. A 6-foot-tall animated birthday cake stumbled through the room. Harry couldn't say whether or not the cake looked like Gilderoy Lockhart, but it did look delicious. When Pansy saw Draco and Harry, she squealed and skipped over. You 2 boys look so cute. Thank you for coming to my party. No problem, said Harry. Draco took Pansy's hand and lightly raised it to his lips. Pansy, I would never miss such an auspicious event. Pansy smiled and took Draco's arm. Let's go say hello to Blaise and Theo, she said, pulling Draco towards Zabini and Nott, a pair of first-year boys. Draco looked back at Harry and shrugged, then allowed himself to be led through the room. Harry, suddenly without his best friend, realized that he had never been to a party before, and that he had no idea what to do with himself. For lack of a better plan, he wandered toward the food and selected a few tasty-looking items. All too quickly, Harry found himself with a plate of food, a glass of pumpkin juice, but still no idea of what to do with himself. Harry. Over here. Daphne Greengrass, another first year, was waving at Harry from across the room. Daphne was a tall, slim girl with dark hair and blue eyes. She and Harry hadn't spoken much throughout the year, but she was sitting at a table with Tracy Davis. Harry quickly crossed the room, glad to have somebody to talk to. You look nice tonight, Daphne said as Harry sat down. Thanks, Tracy picked it out. Daphne smiled. Oh, I know. Tracy hasn't been able to stop talking about it. Harry glanced over at Davis, who immediately flopped forward, covering her face with her arms. Despite Davis's attempts to hide, Harry could still see her ears turning red. I'm lucky she came along, Harry said. I was completely helpless. My first instinct was to wear school robes, and my second was to copy what Draco had ordered. Daphne laughed. Oh, that is helpless. Are you certain you don't belong in Hufflepuff? Harry stuck his tongue out at Daphne. The Sorting Hat tried to put me in Hufflepuff, you know. Harry, that's not something you should say out loud. Greengrass sat back in her chair and placed an open hand over her mouth. Wait, are you taking the mickey? Harry shook his head. Not at all. And when I still wanted Slytherin, it tried to send me to Gryffindor. No. What did you do? Greengrass actually was shocked, at this point. Even Davis had looked up, her curiosity overcoming her embarrassment. I insisted on Slytherin. Demanded it, really. Wow, said Daphne. I don't know if I could have done that. Harry rubbed his knuckles on his robes. It's not that big of a deal. If I could trick the Sorting Hat into putting me in Slytherin, I probably belonged here all along. Harry took a sip of pumpkin juice. Are you girls enjoying the party? It's a little much, Daphne said, but that's what you get from a Parkinson. Oh. Tracy sat up and spoke in a quiet voice. The Greengrasses and the Parkinsons are both old pure-blood families. They know each other a little too well, and familiarity breeds contempt. Not at all, said Daphne, raising her chin. What breeds contempt is an entire family's failure to realize that having money does not require spending it on ostentatious frivolities. Harry had the impression that Daphne had said that sentence, or something like it, many times before. As Daphne finished speaking, the Lockhart cake stumbled past. The cake was, unsuccessfully trying to evade Crabbe and Goyle, who were chasing behind it with forks. I fail to see anything ostentatious or frivolous about this party, Harry said, eyes on the walking cake. He struggled to keep his face perfectly expressionless. I agree, said Davis, forcing her mouth into a thin line. This is obviously serious business. Daphne nodded solemnly. Business of the most serious kind. The three students waited for a moment, broke out into peals of laughter. Harry enjoyed his time with Daphne and Tracy. Daphne was easy to talk to, and Tracy, although rather quiet, always seemed to be intensely involved in the conversation. At some point in the evening, Pansy swooped over to Harry's table. Draco collapsed into a chair next to Harry. Pansy remained standing, nearly bouncing on her heels with excitement. Daphne, you absolutely must see the dress my mother bought me. Pansy was off at a sprint, clearly expecting Daphne to follow. Oh, I must. Daphne glanced over at Tracy. Come on, Tracy. I'm not doing this alone. The two girls stood and followed Pansy across the common room. Harry finally had time to look at Draco. Draco's tie was loose and askew, his robes had several wrinkles and creases, and there appeared to be a stain on his sleeve. What happened to you? Harry asked. Draco shook his head. Pansy. It's like she's been drinking pepper-up potions all day. Is that like 7-Up? Or Dr. Pepper? What? Never mind. Harry was tempted to grumble about Draco being wizard-raised, but he didn't think his friend would see the humor in it. Fancy a game of exploding snap. After a few games of cards, Crabbe and Goyle walked by and asked to join. Across the room, the Lockhart cake had collapsed. Massive holes had been torn from its legs and torso. The person or persons responsible were obvious, based on the cake smeared on Crabbe and Goyle's faces and hands. Harry redealt the cards for four-way. Draco won, which wasn't surprising to Harry. Harry and Draco had played many games of exploding snap, and Draco almost always won. What was surprising to Harry was Crabbe coming in second. Harry had never seen Crabbe display any particular cleverness before. Goyle was dead last. As Draco dealt for the next game, a shadow fell on the table. Harry looked up and found Marcus Flint, captain of the Quidditch team, looming over him. Harry would never admit it, but he had a fair bit of hero worship for the Slytherin chaser. Potter. Malfoy. Flint was a man of few words. Harry was too stunned to speak, but Draco played things smooth. Flint, hello. Care for a game of exploding snap? Flint shook his head. I came over here to talk. I've looked at the flying grades for first years, and you two are the best. Bring your brooms next year. There'll be an open spot on the team, and we might keep a reserve player. Got it, said Draco. Without another word, Flint turned and walked away. But grades haven't been released, Goyle said. Of course they haven't, said Draco. Flint probably got them from Professor Snape. But why would Snape have our flying grades? Goyle's brow was furrowed as he tried to process what had happened. I bet Snape got them from Madam Hooch, said Harry. He probably does it every year. Tells her that he's making a midterm evaluation of Slytherin first years, or some other excuse. Draco smiled. Then he gives the grades to Flint, and Flint can recruit for next year. Better recruiting means better players. Which is why we keep winning the Quidditch Cup, said Crabbe. I like it. The boys resumed their game of exploding snap, now excitedly discussing Quidditch. Flint had practically told Harry and Draco that they would make the Quidditch team next year. Harry imagined the roar of the Slytherin crowd in his ears as he swooped about the pitch on his broom. It would be fantastic. Harry was so distracted that he almost lost to Goyle in their last game. Chapter 6. It was nighttime, and a light fog was rolling over the grounds of Hogwarts. An odd group of students stood outside Hagrid's hut: Harry, Draco, Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger. Harry was stamping his feet to keep warm. Harry had finally convinced Hagrid that a dragon was not a house pet. It had taken weeks of prompting from Harry, and a close call in which Norbert the dragon had nearly burnt down Hagrid's hut, but Hagrid had finally conceded. If Hagrid's hut was going to remain standing, the dragon had to go. The next problem was determining exactly how to get rid of a dragon. Hagrid wasn't going to allow Norbert to be released into the care of a poacher or potions dealer. Norbert would be dead within a week and sold in pieces. But there weren't many private parties interested in purchasing an enormously dangerous pet that would likely burn down their house and eat their family, either. Hagrid even contacted Gringotts, but the goblins replied that they already had a dragon to guard their bank. Then Harry remembered Ron Weasley's older brother. Harry had convinced Weasley to organize the Midnight Exchange. Weasley insisted that he be allowed to bring along Granger. It wasn't every day that you had the opportunity to see a dragon. Harry realized that Ron was right, and invited Draco as well. This was not a good idea. Weasley and Draco began bickering in the Great Hall and continued all the way to Hagrid's hut. Granger and Harry hung behind, saying little. The mood was tense as the four students waited in the cold spring air. "How'd he get the egg, anyway?" asked Weasley. Harry shrugged. "Somebody gave it to him in a bar." Draco sneered. "In a bar? Sounds like the sort of place you'd find Hagrid." Granger's curiosity was piqued. People don't just carry dragons' eggs around in bars. They don't just give them away, either. "So ask Hagrid," Harry said. Hagrid insisted that the egg was a gift. "Nice guy, he was," Hagrid said. "Cold to seen his face, dark hood and all, or I'd want ter give him somet in return, you know. He bought all the drinks that night, a real good un." Granger's head shot up. "Hagrid, what else did the two of you talk about?" "Nothin' much," Hagrid said. "He was real interested in animals. Had a great talk about Fluffy, we did." "Fluffy?" Granger asked. "The three-headed dog on the third floor," said Harry. "That thing is named Fluffy," said Draco and Weasley in unison. The two immediately began glaring at one another. "What did you tell him about Fluffy?" asked Granger, not to be distracted. Apparently, Weasley had taken Granger to see the dog, as well. "Nothin'. I just said that people get scared too easy of animals. With Fluffy, for instance. Play a little tune, and he goes right to sleep." After the dragon was taken away, on the way back to the castle, Weasley was insistent that the shadowy figure Hagrid met in the bar had been Snape. Harry and Draco were vehemently opposed. "Snape couldn't get past the dog on Halloween," Weasley said. "So he got Hagrid drunk and bribed him with a dragon egg. Now Snape knows how to get past the dog, and he's probably just waiting for a chance." Harry shook his head. "Dumbledore knows Snape was up there on Halloween. Snape told Dumbledore himself. You can't be serious." "I am serious. As soon as we get to the castle, I'm going to tell Dumbledore." "Go ahead," said Draco. "But don't expect us to go with you." At the castle doors, the Gryffindors split away from the Slytherins. As soon as Weasley and Granger were out of sight, Harry pulled out his invisibility cloak. "I want to see what Dumbledore says," Harry whispered. Draco and Harry slipped under the cloak and followed the pair of Gryffindors. Before they could find Dumbledore, however, Weasley and Granger stumbled upon Professor McGonagall. McGonagall denied their request to see the headmaster, and gave the pair a detention the next evening for breaking curfew. Granger and Weasley protested, but McGonagall remained firm. Underneath the cloak, Harry and Draco snickered, then quietly snuck back to the Slytherin dormitory. Exclamation point! Exclamation point! Exclamation point! Exclamation point! Exclamation point! Asterisk. "How was that detention, Weasley?" Harry asked. Weasley and Granger were seated at the Gryffindor table for lunch. Harry and Draco stood behind them. "Shut up, Potter," said Weasley. "I got that detention because I was helping you. You owe me." Harry laughed. "You got that detention because you were being stupid about Professor Snape." "I am not being stupid about Snape," Weasley snapped. Draco chimed in. "What did you have to do? Clean under desks?" "No, we went into the Forbidden Forest with Hagrid," said Granger. "Someone or something has been killing unicorns and drinking their blood." Draco and Harry glanced at each other. It sounded gruesome, and a little cool. "Did you find anything?" Harry asked. "We found a dead unicorn," said Granger. "Somebody in a black cloak." "Snape," said Weasley, was drinking its blood. Whoever it was. "Snape," said Weasley, again. Started flying after us. Luckily, a centaur stepped in and saved us." "Saved us from Snape," Weasley said. "Black cloak, swoops around like a giant bat, drinks the blood of innocents to survive." Granger swatted Weasley on the arm. "Ronald, have some respect. Professor Snape is still a teacher." "Indeed I am," said a clipped voice. The four students turned and found Professor Snape looming over them. "All four of you will be late for potions unless you leave for class immediately." It would be in your best interests to do so. The 4 students stood and briskly walked out of the great hall. Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Asterisk. The next day, Weasley was at the front of the Great Hall after dinner, practically shouting at Professor McGonagall. "What do you mean Professor Dumbledore's gone to London? I need to talk to him. Mr. Weasley, I suggest you calm down. Professor Dumbledore's whereabouts were supposed to remain somewhat secret, although that is clearly no longer the case. As Deputy Headmistress, anything you would say to Professor Dumbledore you can also say to me." As Draco and Harry watched, Weasley leaned forward and whispered to McGonagall. Weasley pointed upward several times, twice in the direction of Hagrid's hut, and then gestured wildly at the empty seat where Professor Snape usually took his dinner. Professor McGonagall whispered to Weasley, whose face turned a bright red. Weasley spun on his heel and stiffly walked back to his seat at the Gryffindor table. Harry and Draco snickered. On the way back to the Slytherin common room, Harry heard something strange. "Draco, listen. Does that sound like a heart to you?" Draco paused. "Yes. I've never heard that before." From above came the sound of a slamming door, and the music of the harp was suddenly gone. None of the other students seemed remotely curious. What would otherwise be strange happenings became rather commonplace when one lived at Hogwarts. "You don't think?" Harry hesitated. "I mean, that door could have been on the 3rd floor. And Fluffy likes music. And Professor Snape did leave dinner early tonight." Draco smirked. "Only one way to find out." Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Asterisk. Harry and Draco stood just inside the door to Fluffy's chamber. The enormous dog was sleeping peacefully. Nearby, an enchanted harp played a lullaby. "There's no way Weasley was right," Draco said. "It can't be Snape." "It's somebody," Harry said. There was a noise behind them. The door to the chamber opened and Weasley and Granger slipped through. "Took you too long enough," Draco said. The Gryffindors jumped, startled. "What are you two doing here?" Weasley demanded. "We heard music and got curious," Harry said. "Want to go find out who's trying to steal something from Nicholas Flamel." In unison, Weasley and Draco said, "The Philosopher's Stone." The two glared at one another. "What's the Philosopher's Stone?" Harry asked. "A Philosopher's Stone can make the elixir of life," said Malfoy. "Drink it, and you can be immortal." "You can also use it to turn lead into gold," said Granger. "It's a legendary pursuit of alchemists in the Muggle world." Draco nodded. "It gives you all the money you want and a life long enough to use it. My father is always going on about what he'd do if he had one." "Dumbledore and Flamel are the last 2 wizards powerful enough to create one," said Weasley. "That must be what's hidden here." The other students looked at him in surprise. "What?" It was on a chocolate frog card. Granger stepped forward. "Well? Are we going to follow him?" Harry hesitated. He remembered the words of Professor Snape on Halloween, "The glory of Slytherin was not the glory of a hero." But if Snape was the one trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone, then maybe he was just telling Harry that to keep Harry off the trail. And if Snape wasn't the one trying to steal the stone, then catching the real thief would clear Snape's name and put Weasley in his place. And Harry would be saving the Philosopher's Stone, immortality and infinite money. Surely that risk was worth the reward. "Let's do it," said Harry. Harry crept forward on his tiptoes, walking as silently as possible. Draco, Weasley and Granger followed behind him. The magical harp clinked and plucked in the background. Slightly ahead of Harry, Fluffy snored in triplicate, each of the heads taking alternating breaths. When Harry reached the trap door next to Fluffy, he opened it slowly and looked inside. "No ladder," he whispered. "Maybe we just jump," suggested Weasley. "Sounds like a good way to get killed," said Draco. "Can we levitate down?" asked Harry. Granger shook her head. "You can't hover yourself, magic won't allow it." "What about each other?" "Maybe." Granger put her hand on her chin, lost in thought. The room was absolutely silent. Weasley opened his mouth to say something, but Harry put a finger to his lips. He didn't want Weasley breaking Granger's train of thought. "Or we could put our hands and feet on opposite walls. Friction would stop us from falling, and we could shuffle down." "Guys," said Weasley, "I think we should jump." "And I think you're stupid," Draco said. "No, I really think we should jump." As Weasley spoke, there was a loud rumbling noise, soon joined by a second and a third. Harry's first thought was that the rumbling would overwhelm the music of the harp and wake Fluffy. Harry's second thought was that the harp had already stopped playing, which meant that Fluffy was already awake. Harry's third thought was that, given the choice between jumping into the trapdoor and being eaten by a giant, three-headed dog, Harry would much rather jump. "Jumping it is," said Harry, leaping into the hole. As he fell, he heard yelling behind him. Granger, Weasley and Draco had all quickly followed. As Harry fell, he saw a dim light illuminating the bottom of the hole. The floor appeared to be covered in green vines. Harry braced himself for a hard landing, bending his knees and tucking his body into a roll. The vines turned out to be soft and pliant, and they broke his fall rather comfortably. Harry continued his roll so that his friends wouldn't land on top of him, and ended on his hands and knees. Before he stood, he was already glancing around the chamber for any sign of the thief, but there were none. Behind Harry, Granger and Draco landed on the vines. Draco was forced to dive away to prevent Weasley from landing on top of him. "Watch it, Weasley. Watch yourself," Weasley shouted back. Harry felt something slither around his arms. He looked down and found that the vines had begun to thrash and writhe, and they were tightening around his arms and legs. Harry began to shout for help. "Oh, I know this," said Granger. "This is Devil's Snare." "Thanks for the identification," Harry snapped. He had been caught unawares, and was being pulled to his hands and knees. "Help!" Granger and Weasley began frantically marching around the room, yanking their legs free from the vines before they became fully entangled. Draco tried to get to his feet, but a vine wrapped around his waist and dragged him back to the floor. Granger was thinking out loud. "Devil's Snare likes the damp and the dark, so burn it out," shouted Draco. Vines were now covering his arms and legs, and were moving up his torso toward his head. Meanwhile, Harry was being pulled downward, straining desperately to keep his face from touching the wriggling mass of plants. "Oh, right." Hermione shouted the words to a spell and blue flames erupted from her wand. The vines jerked away from the flames, retreating into farthest corner of the room. Hermione directed the flames toward Draco, who had become so entangled in the vines that only his face was visible. The vines uncurled themselves and released the blonde boy, who scrambled away from them on his hands and knees. Finally, Hermione moved the flames toward Harry, who had completely succumbed to the vines and was now only a green lump on the floor. When the vines finally withdrew, Harry lay prone on the ground for several moments, taking deep, gasping breaths. "At least that wasn't horrible," Draco said sarcastically. Harry stood slowly. "Glad one of us paid attention in herbology." Harry looked around the chamber. There was only one door. "Onward, I guess." The four students moved forward into the next room, finding it filled with hundreds of winged keys. In the middle of the room hovered several broomsticks. On the opposite wall was a single door with a large, ornate lock. "Seems straightforward," said Draco. Before anybody could speak, Draco was aloft on a broom, chasing after keys in the air. Weasley followed quickly behind him, and Harry limped slowly toward the last broom. Granger, who had never liked flying class, stayed on ground. "It's probably the key with the broken wing," Draco yelled. He and Weasley began chasing the key through the room. Harry, once he was aloft, joined them. Weasley was the slowest flyer, but his turns were sharp and crisp. Harry was the fastest in a sprint, but he couldn't maneuver as well as Draco or Weasley. The key, however, was more agile than all of them. Worse, the closer the boys got to the broken winged key, the closer the other keys flew in formation. Like a herd of zebras or a school of fish, it was almost impossible to focus on one particular key. After several minutes of frantic flying, the boys had not caught the key. "What now?" Weasley said. Draco looked at Harry. "How about Harry flushes it out, Weasley corners it, and I come from below for the catch?" Harry nodded and began chasing the key around the room. Weasley lurked to one side, forcing the key to turn toward Harry. The flock of keys began to tighten up, protecting the broken key. As the key passed above Draco, the blonde boy darted upward on his broom. Draco snatched at the key as he passed, but missed. The flock of keys exploded into chaos. Harry's eyes never lost track of the broken key, however. As the key twisted away from Draco, Harry darted forward and snatched it from the air. Granger clapped and cheered as the three boys dropped to the floor. "How'd you manage that catch?" Draco said, astonished. Harry shrugged. "Beginner's luck, I guess." Harry unlocked the door and the four students stepped into the next room. They found themselves on the edge of a massive chessboard. Enormous chess pieces stood on the board like silent sentinels. White was nearest, and black stood by the opposite door. "Neat," said Draco flippantly. "Let's go." As Draco stepped onto the board, the spire-shaped bishop his square dissolved into dust. Draco moved a step forward onto a pawn's space and instead smashed his face against an invisible wall. Draco fell backwards onto the floor, where he sat and rubbed his nose. What the hell was that? Weasley's eyes went wide. It wasn't a legal move. We have to play ourselves across. Weasley began shouting orders, directing Granger and Harry to play as rooks, and taking the place of a knight himself. Weasley was confident in his actions, moving pawns and pieces around the board with authority. Harry recognized that Weasley had significant experience playing chess, and deferred to the Gryffindor. Draco apparently recognized this, as well, and stayed sullenly quiet throughout the majority of the game. White, under Weasley's control, took the first pawn. A white knight moved up and over, attacking the smaller black pawn. The knight came alive as it moved, raising its arms and crushing the black pawn to pieces. "That's rather awful," said Harry. "What happens if one of us gets taken?" Weasley's face had gone white. "Let's not find out." Weasley's directions became more careful. He took longer and longer to deliberate between moves. Harry could see, even from across the room, that Weasley had broken into a sweat. "Okay, that's it," shouted Weasley. "We've won the game." Harry looked around, but nothing happened. The king wasn't in checkmate. "Looks like we're still playing," Harry said. "There's a mating pattern," Weasley said. "We're guaranteed checkmate in 3 moves. Normally, the opponent concedes at this point." Draco looked around darkly. "Doesn't look like concession is part of this game. Just win it, and we'll go on." "You're not going to like this, Malfoy," Weasley said. "You have to sacrifice yourself." "What?" "I do, too. It's the mating pattern, checkmate in 3 moves. I put the king in check. They have to take my piece, or they lose. Then you put the king in check by moving there." Weasley pointed at a spot on the board. "They have to take your piece, or they lose. But then they're cornered. Harry moves 3 spaces up, puts the king in check, and nothing can take his piece or get in the way. Checkmate, we win the game." Draco shook his head. "This is stupid. I'm not getting myself attacked by some giant chess piece for a lark." Draco moved to leave the chessboard, but again found himself trapped at the edge of his square. He pounded on the invisible wall with his fist. "Let me out." "That's not a legal move, Draco," said Weasley quietly. "We're in this to the end." Draco turned to Harry. "This is what Gryffindor gets you." Weasley slowly stepped forward. "Check," he announced. A black rook responded, sliding forward and striking Weasley in the head. Weasley collapsed, and the black chess piece tossed his limp body to the edge of the board. Weasley tried to stand up, but fell to his hands and knees and vomited. Draco stormed onto the square Weasley had previously indicated. "Check," he snapped. A pawn slid diagonally forward. Draco raised his hand to protect his head, and the pawn punched him in the ribs. Draco clutched his side and staggered across the board, collapsing next to Weasley. Harry advanced 3 spaces. Checkmate. The black king dissolved into dust, and the remaining black pieces froze in place. Harry tentatively walked forward, and found that the edges of his square were no longer blocked by the magical wall. "Are you all right?" Harry yelled to Draco. "No, not at all," said Draco, wincing as he spoke. "What about Ron? He might have a concussion," asked Granger. "I'll keep an eye on the Prat," said Draco angrily. "Just go. I'll be furious if I did that for nothing." Granger and Harry looked at each other, then slowly walked through the next door. A familiar but repulsive smell assaulted their nostrils, the rank scent of troll. The troll lay in the middle of the room, unconscious with a large lump on its head. "That was easy," said Harry. "Let's be quick about it." Harry and Granger dashed across the room and through the next door. In the middle of the next room was a table, and on the table sat 7 bottles and a piece of parchment. As Harry and Granger moved into the room, the door slammed behind them. Giant purple flames erupted from the floor between them and the door. "No going back," Harry said. Harry turned to look at the opposite door just in time to see black flames ignite in front of it, barring their progress. "No going forward, either," said Granger. The students approached the table. A riddle was written on the piece of parchment, giving small hints about the contents of the bottles. 3 were poison, which would incapacitate a thief. 2 were wine, which would subsequent attempts at solving the riddle more difficult. 1 was a potion to move through the black flames, and 1 was a potion to move backward through the purple. It's not even magic, Granger said. It's logic, just like the chess set. So many wizards don't have an ounce of common sense. Harry nodded. Good thing we're muggle-raised, right? Right. Granger leaned forward and began considering the bottles. Harry did the same, rereading the riddle several times. Harry and Granger stood up and pointed at the smallest bottle. That one, they said in unison. They turned to one another and smiled. Harry lifted the bottle and shook it. There's only enough for one. Potter. Harry. I've been thinking. Ron and I came here to stop Snape. Harry opened his mouth to protest, but Hermione held up her hand to stop him. Whether it's Snape or someone else, Ron and I didn't know what Fluffy was guarding. Whoever is on the other side of that door would probably do anything to get the Philosopher's Stone. A wizard who is willing to do anything to get what he wants. You don't have to go. I'll do it, Harry said. Whoever it is, they shouldn't be stealing from Dumbledore and Hagrid. That's not what I meant, said Granger. Maybe we should go get Professor McGonagall. All of us. Harry shook his head. Going to McGonagall didn't work earlier tonight, and it won't work now. You should take the escape potion. Use the brooms from the flying key room to get up to the trap door and past Fluffy. Take Draco and Ron to the hospital wing, and tell a professor that I'm still down here. That'll get the staff here fast, if they think I'm in danger. Harry, they won't just think you're in danger. You'll actually be in danger. Harry smiled. I'll rely on my Slytherin cunning to keep me safe. Granger nodded, then darted forward. She hugged Harry tightly. Thank you for Halloween, she whispered. She stepped back and quickly drank the other potion. I'll be back with help. Good luck. Harry watched as Hermione stepped through the purple flames before he turned to face the final door. He raised his bottle to his lips and swallowed deeply. The potion coursed through his body like ice. Taking a last, deep breath, Harry stepped forward through the black flames.